Welcome to our session. It is the 8th of September 2016. In my part of the world, it is the 9th in a lot of the other parts of the world. We have a lot of questions to cover today from a variety of people, so I am going to go ahead and jump straight in and get to it. First from Manuel Antonio Barrios Flores. Hi there, I'm new following you, and I'm new recording live shows too. I wanted to know how to record a live gig on my city. I have tried recording from the mixer board last Friday, but I only got a dry sound, no bass or full dynamic range, and he sent a link to a video. The setup was mixer board, stereo RCA outputs to a JuiceLink DT545 stereo plug, so there was some sort of adapter cable, so RCA to stereo plug, which would be a TRS, and that was then routed into a Sony SLR, so your camera, an A77 Mark II. Okay. When you heard the monitor, the sound was okay. Thanks a lot. Every comment is grateful. So, Manuel, the first thing, I did watch the video. It's a sort of a reggae piece. It's actually kind of fun. But I see what you're saying. It does seem that it's missing some bass. So I think it comes down to a few things. I don't know for sure, but what I suspect is that, first of all, it depends on where you were monitoring that. If you were monitoring on your camera, then you should have been hearing what was being recorded by the camera. And I assume that's the kind of the final recording that was posted in the video here, because you didn't have any other recording devices in your signal chain there. If, on the other hand, you're recording at your JuiceLink, or you were monitoring straight from the mixing board, completely different thing. So first thing you want to make sure is you're monitoring from your camera, if that's possible. I don't know if the A77 Mark II has a headphone jack. I assume it does, but I don't really know for sure. So that would be the ideal situation, is monitor where you're actually recording, so you know what's making it to the recorder. You may already be doing that, so I realize that. But there may also be something else in the signal chain. Another thought is that perhaps at the mixing board, they weren't giving you the full mix. That's possible. And I have run into that situation before. So that's something to consider as well. So what you need to do is pretty much just work your way through the entire signal chain. Now, I realize it's tricky. Oftentimes when you go up to ask the favor of whoever's operating the mixing board, they don't really want to be bothered a whole lot generally by some person that just shows up and wants to do a recording. So I know you have to be careful on that. Ideally, in an ideal situation, you would be able to go in and kind of work your way through the entire signal chain and say, okay, first of all, let's make sure that I'm getting the full mix out of the mixing board. And so you would want to monitor on the first device that's receiving the signal from the mixing board. So in this case, that would be the JuiceLink. From there, then you'd also want to monitor from the camera to make sure that the camera is receiving everything from the JuiceLink. So kind of just work your way through the signal chain is the answer. I apologize. I don't know if that answers your question, but I hope that gives you some strategies for kind of working out the issue in a future one. All right, next question. And I apologize. This is written in a set of characters that I don't know how to read. So I apologize. I don't know your name, but you said, I have a problem that I would like to solve. How to connect a USB interface to a Zoom H4n to record another copy beside the copy recorded in Adobe Audition. So it sounds like what this person is doing is recording a podcast or some other voiceover using an audio interface into their computer, into Adobe Audition, and at the same time, they want to send a signal out from the audio interface into a Zoom H4n for a backup copy. So it says here, I tried the line in and XLR in Zoom H4n, but always have a distorted copy and not the same quality as Adobe Audition. How to solve it? I think in there, and I have to double check this. Give me just a second. Let me pull my H4n out. I think what is happening, it sounds like if it's coming in distorted, it sounds like what you're probably doing is you're sending a line out from your audio interface and bringing and you have the preamp on the H4n set to mic level in. So it's probably over amplifying it and you're getting all that distortion. And I'm trying to remember, I know that the Zoom H4n in particular is a recorder that has problems recording line level signals. It's a known issue, unfortunately. Or I've heard that from other people. I have never used this recorded specifically for that. This recorder, I should say. Level auto off, mono mix, phantom. See, I don't know if there's a way to tell it to take a line in instead of a mic in on that. So I have to suspect that that's probably the issue. Because really on the input setting, the only options I have here, low cut, compressor limit, no, monitor on, fine. 1-2 link, so it's a stereo link, that's not relevant. Level auto off. I think this is it's like an automatic gain control, I believe. Mono mix off. Mid-side matrix off, phantom off, plug-in power off. Yeah, see, those are the only options there. So it doesn't look like, well, let's see if record. No, unfortunately, I don't know if there's a way to do that on the H4n. I apologize. I think that's the bad news, is that I don't think the H4n is set up to do that. I don't know. My guess is that the way it works is that if you take a 1/4 inch input onto this input, that it switches to line level, but I'm not positive on that. I just remember reading on some forums previously that people that attempted to record concerts or any other line level signal with an H4n ran into problems and it didn't work well, and that they did not recommend this recorder for that purpose, unfortunately. So I'm sorry to be the bearer of bad news, but that's that's my understanding of the issue. So I hope that helps. Next question from Jeff Brass. Hi, Curtis. We chatted a bit last week regarding mics in reverberant rooms. Still looking. Other than treating a room with sound blankets, etc., have you tried any acoustic shields around the mic to reduce reflections hitting the mic? Wondered if this would help or hinder. Jeff, that's a great question. And actually, yes, that is something I have tried. And yes, that definitely helps. I have not done it for video. I have done it for voiceover. And there are a number of what are generally called reflection filters. SE Electronics makes one that I have used. My brother has one in his studio. And it works pretty nicely. Is it perfect? No, but it definitely cuts down on the reverberation making its way back into your recording. It really is not made for film, but you could probably find a way to rig it up. That particular one runs $250 US. You could find, there are less expensive options out there for sure. But that one is one I have used, and it does do a pretty nice job of cutting down those reflections. So I think if you do decide to go that way and you find one that kind of fits your budget, the challenge is going to be rigging that up if you are planning to use it around the back of a, say, for example, a cardioid or a supercardioid small diaphragm condenser mic for recording dialogue. So yeah, definitely could help. A variety of options out on the market. Some of them are better than others. The only one I've really used is the SE Electronics, and it was decent. It did a pretty good job. So I think that's a good line of thinking. So I hope that helps. Thanks, Jeff. Next question from Jeff Remus. I use a Tascam DR70D to record and tried to output to my DSLR camera from the DR70D simply for the purpose of helping to sync video with audio. I don't really have a problem with that, because I thought the signals would be almost identical and the slate signal too. Anyway, what I noticed was that I was unable to control the audio into the camera and unable to adjust the camera down low enough to get good audio, and the amount of noise coming out of the camera and levels were horrible. I adjusted the Nikon D610 mic levels down very low with no change. Are there known issues going from the DR70D to a camera from the camera out port? Thank you, Jeff. I'm not aware of any issues with that. I know on the DR60D, and again, I don't have a DR70D right here with me. On the DR60D, there's actually an output level adjustment that you can pull that back a little bit, and that would solve the problem. I don't think there's a separate control for that on the DR70D, but it may be a menu item. So you may want to look through the menu and see if there's an option there. I apologize, I don't have a DR70D on hand to check that right here. If you do have any questions, go ahead and if you pull up the user manual online and do a search for either line level or output level. I think probably output level will probably, you'll have to do a searching around in the manual there to see if there's anything there. But I know on the DR60D they have that, so I would be very surprised if the DR70D does not have that. And likewise, yes, adjusting the volume down or the input level down on the Nikon D610 is the right thing to do. And then on top of that, you'll want to find the line out or mic out control on the DR70D and adjust that down as well. Next question from Jeff Brass. Another one. Very good, Jeff. When setting up sound blankets in a medium-sized room, do you have a technique you use to work out good spots? Yes, that's a great question. I do. What I typically will do is, obviously, I need to have it out of the picture, so that's going to limit where I can put it. First of all, what I do is I assess where are the hard surfaces. Usually it's going to be walls and floors. I can't usually do a whole lot about ceilings because there just aren't not a lot of convenient ways to hang a blanket from the ceiling, and block the sound that is hitting the ceiling. So I usually focus on the floors and the walls and outside of the frame of the picture. What I'll typically do is look for the biggest surfaces that are hard, and those will be the first places I'll set up blankets. Once I have the blankets set up, and for example, if I know I have hard floors, a tile floor of some sort or any sort of hard floor, I'll just throw a blanket down to cover the largest open area there. And then typically what I'll do is I'll walk around the room and clap and listen for the reverberation. If I feel like I'm still getting a lot of it, I may tweak the location of the blankets, maybe find some other large, flat, hard surfaces and put some blankets on there as well. So in terms of hanging them up, the best way I think is with a Century stand, or a pair of Century stands is ideal because they're very sturdy and they won't tip over. I mean, the chances of tipping over are pretty low. And a lot of times if I have enough time to plan ahead of time and to bring the gear, I'll actually buy a piece of speed rail, which is just some electrical metal conduit that you can buy at a home, like a hardware store. And you can do a lot with that. You can actually suspend that between two Century stands, hang the blanket over that with spring clips, and that can cover a lot of space and really, really help in terms of pulling down some of that reverberation. So good question, Jeff. I hope that helps a little bit there. All right, here's a question from Greg Palmer. Actually, several questions. I noticed the Zoom H recorder eats batteries even when sitting on the shelf not being used. I'm wondering if you've noticed the same issue. Absolutely, I have. I think that what it's doing, if I had to guess, is that its time code clock is still running. And those time code, when you have a highly accurate time code clock, it uses more energy than just a simple, less accurate one. That's my hypothesis. I don't know that for sure, but that's my guess there. Have you used the F8 iPad application? If so, have you found it very useful? Do you mix with it? That's a good question as well. Generally, the answer is no, but let me qualify that. I think it's a useful application. What I don't think it's useful for is mixing, unfortunately. And I need to try it again. I don't know if they've updated it recently, but the issue I had with it for mixing is that the virtual faders, the linear faders that you can move up and down for each channel, those linear faders are overly sensitive on the touch screen. So when I went to touch it, the smallest change I can do is a 3 dB change. Like just tapping it automatically does a 3 dB change. And that's way too much. That's very audible. So it suddenly sounds much quieter, for example. Not much quieter, but you can hear a difference in the levels when you do that. So for that, I don't find it particularly useful. However, I do find the app very useful for metadata entry. So if I want to name tracks, enter notes about the tracks, things of that nature, that's where I find that app is really, really helpful. So that I think that's my overall kind of impression of using that Zoom app. I think Zoom did a very nice job. I'm really glad they did that. I think my sense is it's a limitation of the device. It's not the Zoom device, but the iPad or the iPhone that you're using to do the mixing. Other people may have other opinions on that as well. Other people may not find that to be problematic, but that was my impression, and so I don't generally use it for that. Between the Zoom F8 and your Sound Devices 633, do you have a preference? What drives you to use one or the other for audio recording? Have you noticed a difference in the quality between the two or in ease of use? Yes, I do have a definite preference. My preference is for the Sound Devices. And the reason for that is that the Sound Devices sounds, I think, maybe just a little bit better. It's not a night and day difference, so that's not the main reason. For me, it's mainly about ergonomics. I think the ergonomics of the Sound Devices is better, but you're paying a very hefty price for that difference. So for example, mixing on the Sound Devices 633 with the inbuilt, the large knob potentiometers, very, very smooth, very easy to operate, it's a dream to really mix with those. In terms of other ergonomic features, if I am mixing on more kind of a cart situation, I don't technically have a cart, but if I'm doing a corporate piece and I can set the mixer down on a, like a desk or something, what I like to do is also bring a USB keyboard, and I can plug that USB keyboard into the 633, and I can enter metadata with a proper physical keyboard, and that makes entering metadata much faster, and that makes it a lot easier to use from that standpoint. I think the headphone amplifier on the 633 is quite a lot better, and I feel a lot more confident using that in making decisions about whether or not I have a problem. So that's another advantage of the 633. It has a lot of physical controls. You don't have to do very much menu diving at all on the 633, which is really nice. You do have to learn how to use all the different controls, but that makes it really nice to work with too. So I think that's just sort of it's sort of a differentiation between pro-level devices and non-pro level devices. And you're just going to see that kind of thing. That's just kind of where the pro devices really kind of focus. But all that said, the F8 is an amazing recorder for its price tag. And incidentally, while we're on the topic, the Zoom just announced the F4, which is a new recorder that will be coming out. I'm in the process of trying to get my hands on one. I don't think it starts shipping until later this year. I don't know if it's October or November, but somewhere in that time frame. It's sort of the little brother to the Zoom F8. It has 4 inputs instead of 8, 4 XLR inputs instead of 8. It's the same size roughly, but what that does for you is that because it has fewer inputs, you have just 4 potentiometers, and they're much larger. And I think mixing with that would be much more realistic than it is with the F8, because the F8, those potentiometer knobs are so small, it's really kind of difficult to do that. But I really, really like the Zoom F8, and I think it's a very good recorder. Another thing on the sound devices, just kind of working back to your original question, do you have a preference between the F8 and the 633? Yes. Another thing is I have proper analog limiters on the Sound Devices 633. That has saved me a few times where someone in a talent suddenly got much louder than they were. The Zoom F8's limiters are actually digital limiters, so it's possible that when someone gets really loud, you could already have clipping before the limiter has a chance to do anything with it, because again, it has to go through the sound goes through the preamp, then it gets converted to digital, then the limiter kicks in on the F8. On the Sound Devices 633, the limiter is actually implemented in the analog stage, so you can actually save the audio before it gets clipped and convert it to digital. So that's a significant difference between those two devices. Now the F4 also has limiters, and they actually kind of played it up in the marketing materials that I saw over on their website, but they're not clear. I assume it's a software or a digital limiter, just like on the F8. But we'll get our hands on that and do a review and see if that's changed at all. So those are just sort of a high-level overview of why I prefer using the 633. But again, I don't want to down-talk the F8. The F8 is an amazing recorder for its price. Next question. I noticed that you have Rycote Cyclone Blimp. Have you found a need to use a dead cat with it on windy conditions? Have you noticed any difference between the Cyclone and a traditional blimp so far as sound quality or usefulness? Yes, all good questions. So Cyclone, let me grab this here. Okay. Hopefully you can see that. The Cyclone is pretty much, I think, Rycote's top-of-the-line wind cover and suspension mount. They're pricey. They're, I think it's $600 and some dollars. Maybe it was closer to $700. Pricey piece of gear. But it has some significant advantages from my point of view over the traditional blimps. And by the way, there are some really great ones out on the market that are far more affordable. Rode makes one just called the Rode Blimp. They actually updated it fairly recently, maybe in about the last year or so. And the Rode Blimp works really quite well. And actually so do all the other traditional blimps that are kind of the same design, kind of that cylinder with rounded ends, with a shock mount that you mount everything to. I've used the Rode Blimp. I've used the Rycote, kind of the traditional Rycote with the same design as the Rode. And then I've also used the Rycote Cyclone. And this is the newer version of the Cyclone, the version 2. The original ones were black. Differences, yes. The number one difference in terms of ease of use is that the Cyclone is just you can get into your microphone a lot more efficiently because it's just a magnetic retention system here, which is really nice. So if you've got to switch out microphones, you can do it much more quickly with this. I always fought with the Rode Blimp, and in my experiences using them, fought with the Rode Blimp and the Rycote, kind of the original style. I don't remember what they call it. Windjammer perhaps, or I don't know if that's the furry cover that you put on. It's a Windjammer. But in any case, you have to screw the ends off and then slide it out. And so it takes a little bit longer, and that unscrewing the end is actually pretty fiddly, I found. So that's one thing. In terms of overall wind protection, this offers a little bit more than the traditional blimps without hair, without the furry covers. And so I can go into winds that are a little stiffer, a little faster with this than I could with those traditional ones. And again, not a huge difference, but it's you can tell a difference. You can definitely tell a difference. I don't have a furry cover for this, and I don't usually shoot outdoors when it's that windy. Anyway, I actually don't shoot outdoors that much generally anyway. Done just a few times, but in any case, this works pretty nicely. I like it that, I haven't, overall, yes, you can work in faster winds with this, and you also can get the furry cover that goes on top of this for even more. I have not shot in a wind yet where this was not sufficient. So I have shot in winds where the typical or the traditional blimp style covers on their own without the furry covers was not sufficient. And so I did have to put the furry cover on those. So yeah, there is a difference between that. The nice thing about this as well is that it's shaped differently. You can see it's actually larger on this end than it is on this end. In theory, what that is supposed to do, and the reason they designed it that way, was that it should produce fewer internal reflections, if I understand correctly. They won't be. In short, I think there are circumstances with the traditional blimp covers where you can sometimes experience some phasing issues because of the symmetrical shape of the blimp cover. This one is asymmetrical for that reason, so that you will experience less of that. Now, that's not something I've noticed a lot of ever, but that's one of the marketing selling points for the Rycote Cyclone. So those are some thoughts there. This is also lighter weight. The Rode is the least expensive of them that I've used. That one runs about $300 US, but it's also the heaviest. The Rycote, the traditional Rycotes are a little bit lighter weight, but otherwise, in terms of build quality, to me, they seem pretty much the same as the Rode. And then these are, I believe these are lighter weight still. And they have these other features, again, like the ability to quickly access your microphone just by opening like that. And the asymmetric shape. As in addition to this special material that they use, it's a different material they use on this versus the traditional ones, which makes it resistant to more wind or faster winds than the traditional ones. So that's kind of the thinking there. This one's been working well for me. All right, Greg, let's just see. I think that was all the questions from Greg. Let's go back and see if there are any others here. Okay, here's one from Samuel. Samuel, any thoughts on collecting audio in an industrial environment with ambient noise in the 60 to 90 dB range? Wow. First of all, you better talk to OSHA if you're in the United States. I don't know if you are. That's a pretty loud, I assume you're talking about sound pressure levels there, and that's pretty loud. I think the OSHA standard is if a worker can't work in an area that has sound pressure levels greater than 78 dB for an 8-hour period, and if they do that, you have to provide them hearing protection. And anyway, that's just that's neither here nor there. But your question, what are some hints? Yeah, this is a good time to use a dynamic microphone, to be honest. This is where I usually punt and go with a handheld mic. If you can't do that, I would, there are high-end solutions for this. Sheps makes the Super CMIT, which is a shotgun microphone, which actually does some active electronic processing of the audio signal to suppress noise. But that's a very expensive microphone. I think it's about $4,500 US just for the microphone. There are also some other processing gear things that you can buy to also do a similar type thing. But what I would probably do, if you can have a mic in frame and it's more of an interview type thing, I would go with a dynamic microphone. Something even as simple as a Shure SM58 would do the job better than a lot of other microphones. And in fact, when I did the sort of interviews at NAB on the show floor this year, I used a Sennheiser, don't remember the exact model number. I will look it up and put it under the video here. But a Shure SM58 would also kind of do the job as well. So that would be my first choice. Second choice, if that's not an option, if you do have to have the microphone outside, some people will sometimes use cardioid lavalier mics. My experience is those are a pain to use because you have to get them aimed just right, and they don't usually sound that great. I would probably stay away from those, but some people use those. Another option is to use a cardioid microphone. Now, I would stay away from supercardioid and hypercardioid microphones in that case because they're just going to pick up too much behind them. And in that case, what I would probably do is get a cardioid boom microphone and get it in there as close as I could. I would avoid scooping because scooping is almost always going to pick up more noise from the ceiling. But if I can get one boomed in really close, work with your director of photography and see if you can do a tight shot when you're in that, in those circumstances, in as much as possible. For at least for the parts where the talent are talking more intimately. If they're touring around and you need a wide shot, then I would just put a lavalier microphone on them and do your best to clean it up in post as far as noise is concerned. But yeah, my first choice would be a dynamic handheld. If you can't do that, a cardioid boom mic if you can't, and then, if you're not going to have tight enough framing for the shot, then I would just get a omnidirectional lavalier and hope for the best. So that would be my approach. Thanks for the question, Samuel. That's a good one. All right. We have another question here from Mohammed. Oh, this is the same question we covered earlier. Your name is Mohammed. Now I understand. Okay. This is the question about the H4n using it to record a backup copy. So I think we've addressed that as best we can. Unfortunately, not the happiest of answers, but okay. Next question is from Russell. Russell, you had an interesting question. So Russell is actually recording a church service with some music, it sounds like. And let me just go ahead and read the first thing that Russell sent over to me. I really enjoyed your sound production course and realized I have the right mics for my purposes, but needed an external audio recorder. So I purchased the Tascam DR60D Mark II and used your link. Even though the Tascam DR60D seems to be a good fit for my purpose, I'm really realizing how complicated my recording environment really is compared to normal. I use Final Cut Pro 10 and don't have Adobe Audition simply because it's not in the budget at this point. So that's totally fine. I record a church service weekly. There is a soundboard mixer that all of the mics go through. And there are tons of them because you have a drum kit as well. It sounds like as multiple singers and probably instruments. I get 2 1/4-inch outputs for channels 1 and 2 for the left, right, respectively into the DR60D. That's all good. For ambient sound, I use a Rode Stereo Video Mic Pro at plus 20 dB on the mic and high on the DR60D with limiter enabled, along with the slate and head tail. I output from the DR60D into the Atomos Ninja Blade, which is recording the video, to ProRes 422 from the Nikon D750. Problem: how do I deal with delays as they don't appear to be synced up as the slate tone makes apparent? So he sent over some graphics here. And what I could tell, Russell, from the graphics was it looked like over the course of an hour, if I'm understanding all of the things that I'm seeing in those graphics or screenshots, it looks like over the course of an hour, you're probably losing about 3 to 4 frames. You're 3 to 4 frames off in the camera versus the audio recorder. So one of the things that I wrote back and let me just go ahead and kind of talk this through because I haven't finished the thought yet. But anyway, the first thing I suggested is maybe send the audio into the into the D750 instead of the Atomos. And my thinking there was then at least you're not then contending with the latency between between the camera and the Ninja Blade. So what will happen there is all the audio should be synced in the camera, and then what that does is it doesn't necessarily solve the problem that you're still experiencing, which is you're off by 3 or 4 frames, but it it eliminates one factor in the overall chain of devices that you're using there. And what I mean by that is if you send the audio on an analog input into the camera, what you'll have there, and this is just to solve the problem, this is just to do some more investigative work. It's not necessarily going to solve the problem long term, and I realize that. But what you can do is feed the audio from the Tascam into the Nikon D750 instead of into the Ninja Blade, and then you remove one more element. And what we can tell then is how much you're drifting there between the DR60D, the audio recorder, and the Nikon D750. Because I'd be interested to see if that makes a difference at all in terms of the amount of drift that you're getting. So that would be the first thing I would do. That, again, I know it's not going to solve the overall problem, and you wrote back and essentially said that. And that makes sense. So from there, if you don't have Adobe Audition, which actually does have a stretching feature where you could actually stretch the audio clip over the whole thing to add back in those 3 additional frames. What I would probably do in Final Cut Pro 10 is that I would find a spot somewhere in the middle of that hour, somewhere near the 30-minute mark, where you could actually cut the video clip, disconnect, I don't remember the exact command in Final Cut Pro 10, but you essentially reveal the audio clip in addition to the video clip, and then you can actually disconnect it enough to slide it over 3 frames. And it would obviously be best if you could do that at a spot in the service where there's a pause of some sort, and that would give you the chance to move it over by 3 frames, so by the end, again, it's back in sync. Or you could split it over multiple things and only slide it over by 1 frame each time. So you have a couple of different options there. I know it's very tedious, but that's probably the way I would approach it given the tools that I know you have. The reason I also, again, suggest going into the audio from the Tascam into the Nikon is, again, you just eliminate that other item and just see what your overall latency is between those 2 devices. It's probably still going to be 3 or 4 frames, but it's just good to check so you know exactly where that latency is coming in your overall signal chain. All right, and I think that's okay because, again, that's just scratch audio that's being recorded to the camera and the blade anyway. It's the production audio is being recorded to the Tascam. So I hope that helps a little bit, Russell. Those are very good questions, and I feel for you that is an interesting. It's a frustrating production challenge and post-production challenge, but hopefully that gives you some light or sheds some light on that for you. Okay, next item up. Is actually not a audio question, but it's a good question. Mark Latani asks, hey, he'd be interested in me reviewing this light. We'll come back to that, Mark, at another time in the future. It's a light by PhotoDX called a flapjack, sort of this type of LED light that you can, it's an edge-lit LED light. I would actually tell you that look up on YouTube, look up Dave Dugdale. I know he has reviewed those in the past. So those are definitely worth a look there. I would only say this, I don't know about those particular lights from PhotoDX. PhotoDX LEDs that I purchased years ago, and this may have changed now, so take this with a grain of salt, but the original PhotoDX LED light that I purchased had very bad color quality. I don't know if they fixed it in these. I think they probably have improved. And in fact, if we look at that, do they give it a CRI rating? I don't see a CRI rating on the product information there, or does it? Just taking a quick look here. Yeah, on the B&H side at least, they don't show any sort of CRI or any other sort of color quality specification. So I'd be a little bit leery of those. They're priced right. They're $259 for a single 10-inch disc light. But I'd be careful about color quality. I'd get out there and look at some other, and I'll see if I can review one of those as well. So thanks for that question, Mark. All right, I think, and I apologize if I've missed anyone here, please, I apologize, and please email me again. We had a lot of questions we covered here tonight. I hope that was helpful for you. Keep going, you guys. You guys are making some great progress. Some of you have sent me some of the things you've worked on, and I have been super impressed with some of the things that you've accomplished with relatively meager gear. You know, just a Tascam DR60D Mark II recorder or a 70D. And whatever mics you could scrounge up enough money for. You're doing some great things. And really, again, Making great audio is largely about the skills. You have to have gear, but I think the bigger factor is your skill in using them. So keep it all up. Go ahead and keep sending me your questions. I love interacting with you guys and learning from you as well. And I hope that was helpful. We'll talk to you again next week. Take care.